We are looking at a story most of us believe we know, a beautiful princess, a jealous queen, a magic mirror, and a poison apple. It is a cornerstone of our cultural library, sanitized and softened by Disney into a moral tale about vanity and the triumph of goodness. But this softened version is a pale reflection of a far older, far more disturbing original. There is a detail, a single horrifying instruction at the core of the earliest recorded version that changes everything. It is a command given by the queen to her huntsman. "Kill the child," she says, "and as proof, bring me back her lungs and her liver." She does not just want proof of death, she wants to eat them. This specific, visceral, cannibalistic demand is so bizarre, so out of place in a children's story, that it is almost always ignored or edited out. But what if it is not an anomaly? What if this single gruesome detail is the key? What if the story of Snow White is not about jealousy at all, but about a far more primal fear, the fear of being eaten? To begin this investigation, we have to travel back in time, before the animated films, before the sanitized picture books. We are going to the source. In 1812, two German scholars, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, published the first edition of their collected tales, Kinder- und Hausmärchen, or Children's and Household Tales. This was not a book written for children in the modern sense. It was a work of academic preservation, an attempt to capture the raw, often brutal oral stories told in German households for generations. And it is here, in this first unfiltered version, that we find our first and most crucial piece of evidence. The wicked queen, the one who demands the lungs and liver of a 7-year-old girl, is not her stepmother. She is her biological mother. Let that sink in. The story begins with a queen who wishes for a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as ebony. Her wish is granted. She gives birth to a daughter, and then, as the child grows, the queen's own mirror, the reflection of her own psyche, tells her that her daughter has surpassed her in beauty. The ensuing rage, the murder plot, the demand for the child's organs to be cooked and eaten is an act of a mother against her own flesh and blood. This is the original story. The change to a stepmother was a later revision, made by Wilhelm Grimm in the 1819 edition, and solidified thereafter. He was responding to a growing bourgeois sensibility that found the idea of a villainous biological mother simply too monstrous, too threatening to the sacred ideal of the family. The introduction of the stepmother acts as a crucial buffer. It externalizes the threat. The danger to the child comes from outside the natural family unit, a foreign element that has invaded the home. It makes the story a domestic drama about navigating a blended family. But when the villain is the mother, the story becomes something else entirely. It becomes a primal horror story about the family unit consuming itself from within. The source of life becomes the source of death. The one who gave birth now seeks to reverse that act in the most horrific way imaginable by literally reabsorbing the child back into her own body. The jealousy is no longer just about beauty. It is about vitality, about legacy, about the terrifying biological reality that the new generation is destined to replace the old. The daughter's existence is a living countdown to the mother's social and biological obsolescence. So, what are we looking at when we see this mother's desire to eat her child? It is a symbolic attempt to halt time, to devour the future, to preserve the present. By consuming Snow White's vitality, her youth, embodied by her organs, the mother is attempting a grotesque form of magical transference. The life that I gave you, she is implicitly saying, I will now take back for myself. This is the psychological bedrock of the original tale. It is a story about the terror of maternal envy, a force so powerful it breaks the most fundamental taboo. The change to a stepmother was an act of narrative self-preservation, an attempt by society to look away from a truth it found too disturbing to confront. But the evidence remains in the 1812 text, a ghost in the machine of the fairy tale we think we know. And this ghost is hungry. Now we must turn our attention to the specifics of that hunger. The demand is not for the heart, the classic symbol of life and love. It is for the lungs and the liver. This is not a random choice. In many ancient European traditions and folk beliefs, these organs held specific and potent significance. The liver was often considered the seat of the soul, the source of passions, anger, and life force itself. To consume the liver of a foe or an animal was to absorb their strength and courage. The lungs, associated with the breath, represented the very essence of life's animation. They are the first organ to function at birth and the last to cease at death. The mother's demand is for the absolute core of her daughter's being, her passion and her breath. The huntsman, overcome with pity, cannot bring himself to kill the child. He substitutes a young boar, killing it and harvesting its lungs and liver instead. He brings these back to the queen, and here we reach a pivotal scene, one that confirms the queen's intent beyond any doubt. The text from 1812 is chillingly clear. The cook had to boil them with salt, and the wicked woman ate them, and thought she had eaten the lungs and liver of Snow White. She does not just accept the proof, she completes the ritual. She stands over a stove, a place of domestic nourishment, and transforms it into an altar for a cannibalistic rite. She chews and swallows what she believes is her own child. This act moves the story from the realm of murderous intent into the realm of practiced cannibalism. She is not just a murderer, she is a consumer of human flesh. Why would a story contain such a gruesome element? We have to understand that these tales did not emerge from a vacuum. They were forged in a world far harsher than our own. For centuries, Europe was stalked by famine. The period known as the Little Ice Age, from roughly the 14th to the 19th century, saw unpredictable weather, failed harvests, and widespread, catastrophic starvation. During these times, survival cannibalism was not a myth. It was a terrifying, documented reality. Accounts from the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 and other periods of crisis speak of people eating dogs, cats, rodents, and, in the most desperate of circumstances, each other. Children were abandoned, the elderly were neglected, the social contract was shredded by gnawing hunger. Folk tales are the dreams of a culture. They are where its deepest anxieties are encoded and processed. The story of Hansel and Gretel is the most famous example, a story born directly from the terror of famine, parents abandoning their children in the woods because they cannot feed them, and a witch who lives in a house made of food who seeks to fatten and eat those same children. The witch is the personification of starvation itself. Snow White is operating in the same psychological landscape. The queen's desire to eat her daughter is a monstrous, supernatural reflection of a very real, very grim choice that haunted the collective unconscious of pre-modern Europe. In a world of scarcity, a young, healthy body is a resource. The fairy tale takes this unbearable reality and dresses it up in the magical trappings of jealousy and royal courts. The queen's act of eating the boar's organs is therefore a double-layered event. On the surface, she is a fool, tricked by her servant. But on a deeper, symbolic level, The story is performing a necessary substitution. It allows the taboo to be enacted without the hero being destroyed. The audience gets to witness the horror of the mother's act, to see her consummate her cannibalistic desire, but the object of that desire is miraculously saved. The story provides a magical escape from a real-world horror. The boar dies in Snow White's place, a ritual sacrifice that allows the narrative to continue. But the queen does not know this. In her mind, and for the purpose of understanding her character, she has done the unthinkable. She has feasted on her daughter to sustain her own power, a perfect metaphor for a generation consuming its own future out of a desperate, ravenous vanity. Having survived this first, most direct attempt at consumption, Snow White flees into the forest. This is a classic fairy tale motif, the wilderness as a place of both danger and transformation. She runs until her feet are raw, and just as night falls, she discovers a small cottage. This is the home of the 7 dwarfs, and here we must strip away the familiar, cheerful imagery of the Disney film. We need to look at who these figures were in the original folklore. They are not simply short, jolly men named after emotions. The 1812 text describes them simply as dwarfs who dug for ore and minerals in the mountains. This is their essential characteristic. They are miners. They spend their days deep inside the earth in the dark, hacking away at rock. They are chthonic figures, beings of the underworld. Their realm is not the sunlit world of the castle, but the subterranean darkness. When Snow White enters their home, she is not just finding a safe house, she is descending. She is leaving the world of the living and entering a liminal space, a kingdom beneath the mountains, which in mythological terms is functionally equivalent to the land of the dead. She makes a deal with them. She will be their domestic servant, keeping house for them in exchange for protection from her mother. She escapes one form of servitude for another. The queen, of course, discovers Snow White is still alive through her magic mirror. Now, begin the next series of attempts on her life. These are more intimate, more hands-on than the first. The queen disguises herself as an old peddler woman and comes to the cottage 3 times. First, she tries to sell Snow White stay laces and laces her up so tightly in a new bodice that she cannot breathe and falls down as if dead. The dwarfs return and cut the laces, reviving her. The second time, the queen returns with a poisoned comb. She runs it through Snow White's hair, and the poison makes her collapse. The dwarfs return, find the comb and remove it, and she wakes again. Notice the pattern here. These are attacks on Snow White's developing womanhood. The bodice, a symbol of feminine form and restriction. The comb, an instrument for arranging her hair, her crowning glory. The queen is trying to suffocate and poison the very things that define her daughter's blossoming beauty and vitality. These are not simple murder weapons. They are corrupted instruments of femininity. The mother is using the tools of beauty to kill the beautiful. It is a deeply personal assault. But these attempts are also a prelude, a ratcheting up of the tension before the final, most iconic attack. The third and final attempt involves the poison apple. The queen, a skilled practitioner of witches' arts, creates an apple that is beautiful on the outside, white and red, but poisoned on the inside. It is a perfect symbol of the queen herself, fair on the surface, deadly within. To trick the wary Snow White, she crafts it so that only the red half is poisoned. She cuts it in 2, eats the white half herself, and offers the poisoned red half to the girl. Snow White, seeing the old woman eat it without harm, is convinced. She takes a single bite and falls to the ground, seemingly dead. This time, the dwarfs cannot revive her. They try everything, but there is no lace to cut, no comb to remove. They weep for 3 days. They cannot bring themselves to bury her in the cold, dark earth because she still looks alive, her cheeks still rosy. So they do something very strange. They construct a transparent coffin of glass, place her inside, and inscribe her name and title in golden letters. They place the coffin on top of the mountain, and one of them always stays to watch over it. She has become an object, a perfectly preserved specimen of beauty, trapped between life and death. What are we seeing here? The glass coffin is a crucial symbol. It prevents the final stage of consumption, decay. Her body is saved from being eaten by the earth, by the worms. But she is not alive. She is an artifact, a thing to be looked at. The queen's initial desire was to consume her, to take her beauty inside herself. The dwarfs, in their own way, also seek to possess her beauty, but they do it through preservation and veneration. They turn her into a permanent, unchanging relic. She has escaped the hot consumption of the queen's murderous rage, only to be captured in the cold stasis of the dwarf's grief-stricken ownership. She is a treasure they have mined from the world, now kept on display. For a long time, she lies in the coffin, unchanging. The story could end here, a tragedy. But then, a prince comes riding through the forest and happens upon the dwarf's cottage. He sees the coffin on the mountain and the beautiful girl inside, and his reaction is not one of sorrow or pity. It is one of immediate, overwhelming desire. He does not fall in love with a person. He falls in love with a beautiful corpse. He becomes obsessed. He speaks to the dwarfs, and his words in the Grimm text are telling. He does not ask to help her or to find a cure. He says, "Let me have the coffin. I will give you whatever you want for it." The dwarfs refuse, saying they would not give it up for all the gold in the world. But the prince persists, saying, "Then give it to me as a gift, for I cannot live without being able to see Snow White. I will honour and cherish her as my most beloved." His language is that of a collector, a connoisseur of morbid beauty. He wants to possess the object. His desire is a form of aesthetic consumption, a necrophilic impulse to own the perfect, silent, inanimate beauty in the box. He is not a rescuer in the romantic sense. He is the final bidder in the auction for Snow White's body. Moved by his passion, the dwarfs finally relent. The prince has his servants lift the coffin to carry it away. As they are walking, one of them stumbles on a shrub. The jolt dislodges the piece of poisoned apple that was stuck in Snow White's throat. She coughs it out, sits up, and is alive again. It is critical to note that in the original Grimm telling, there is no true love's kiss. The revival is an accident. It is a clumsy, physical event, a piece of food being knocked loose. This mechanical, almost comical revival starkly contrasts with the romanticised versions we know. It reinforces the physicality of her state. She was not under a magic spell waiting for a hero. She was in a state of suspended animation due to a physical obstruction. Her awakening is not a moment of romantic destiny, but a fortunate mishap. The moment she is alive, the prince's desire shifts from possession of a beautiful object to possession of a beautiful wife. He immediately declares his love and asks her to marry him. Snow White, having just woken from a death-like state in a glass box, agrees. The transfer of ownership is complete. She has passed from her mother's murderous jealousy to the dwarf's preservative custody, to the prince's obsessive collection. She is now to be his bride. A wedding is planned, a grand feast to celebrate the union and her miraculous return to life. And to this feast, an invitation is sent to all the kings and queens of the neighbouring lands, including, of course, Snow White's wicked mother. The queen, believing her rival long dead, is triumphant. But before she leaves for the wedding, she consults her mirror one last time, asking the famous question, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror gives its devastating reply, You, my queen, are fair, it is true. But the young queen is 1,000 times fairer than you. The queen is seized by a paroxysm of rage and terror. She does not know that the young queen is Snow White, but she is compelled to go to the wedding to see this new rival for herself. She cannot resist the pull of her own vanity and envy. She arrives at the castle and recognizes Snow White instantly. She is frozen with terror and hatred, but there is no escape. The narrative has cornered her, and now the story delivers its final, brutal judgment. This is the culmination of the entire cannibalistic theme, the final balancing of the scales. The text says that iron slippers had already been put upon the fire. They are brought forth with tongs, glowing red hot. The queen is then forced to put on these burning shoes and to dance. This is not a swift execution. It is a protracted, agonizing torture performed in public at a wedding feast. A feast is a place of communal consumption, of celebration, of life. And in this setting, the queen is made to perform a dance of death. She is forced to dance until she drops dead. Let us analyze the profound symbolism of this punishment. The queen's sin was born of her own inner fire, her burning jealousy, her hot rage. Her plan was to consume Snow White, a process that would have involved fire, the cooking of her organs. Now she herself is consumed by fire from the feet up. Her own heated passion is turned outward, made literal, and becomes the instrument of her destruction. The dance itself is a grotesque parody of the wedding celebration. While others celebrate the union of life, she is trapped in a solo performance of her own demise. The red-hot shoes are a perfect instrument of justice for her crimes. She, who used the tools of femininity, laces a comb to attack Snow White, is now destroyed by a feminine object, a pair of slippers. She, who could not stand to see another be the centre of attention, is now made the unwilling spectacle for the entire court. Her feet, which carried her on her missions of murder to the dwarf's cottage, are now the source of her undoing. This punishment is the story's final statement on the theme of consumption. The consumer is, in the end, consumed. Her attempts to devour Snow White's life and vitality are turned back on her. She is not simply killed, she is annihilated in a way that directly mirrors her crime. The fire she intended for the cooking pot becomes the fire that burns her alive. The wedding feast, the ultimate symbol of life-affirming consumption, becomes the backdrop for her death by fire. The story achieves a kind of terrible, poetic symmetry. The cycle of violent consumption that she began is now closed, with her as the final victim. So let us pull back and look at the entire journey we have taken. We began with a single disturbing clue, a mother's demand to eat the lungs and liver of her 7-year-old daughter. We followed this clue back to the 1812 first edition of the Grimm's collection, discovering that the villain was not a stepmother, but the biological mother, turning the story from a domestic drama into a primal horror. We examined the cannibalistic act itself, understanding it not just as a symbol of jealousy, but as a grotesque echo of real-world anxieties about famine and survival that haunted the European psyche for centuries. This is a story forged in hunger. We then re-evaluated Snow White's journey. Her flight to the dwarfs was not an escape to a safe haven, but a descent into a symbolic underworld, a place beneath the earth. Her time with them culminated not in safety, but in a state of suspended animation inside a glass coffin, where she became a preserved object, a beautiful corpse on display. Her revival was not the result of a romantic kiss, but a clumsy accident, a physical jolt that dislodged a piece of food. Her rescue by the prince was less a romance and more an acquisition, the claiming of a beautiful object by a collector who could not live without possessing it. Finally, we arrived at the wedding feast, the story's thematic climax. Here, The cannibalistic mother, the source of the story's horror, received her judgment. Her punishment, dancing to death in red-hot iron shoes, was not a random act of fairy tale cruelty. It was a perfectly symmetrical and symbolic retribution. The consumer was consumed by the very fire of her own passions. The story ends not with a simple happily ever after, but with a brutal act of justice that purges the world of its unnatural appetite. What, then, is the broader implication of this reading? It suggests that many of the fairy tales we have inherited are not simple moral lessons for children. They are complex, multi-layered cultural artifacts that have been worn smooth by centuries of telling and retelling and deliberately sanitized for modern sensibilities. Beneath the polished surface of the stories we know, there often lies a much darker, more primal core. These stories are survival guides for a world of profound scarcity, violence, and uncertainty. They are filled with coded warnings about the dangers that lurk not just in the dark woods, but within the four walls of our own homes. The horror in the original Snow White is not a monster or a witch in a remote cottage. The horror is maternal. It is the fear that the person who is supposed to be your ultimate protector could become your ultimate predator. It is the terror of being seen not as a child to be nurtured, but as a resource to be consumed. Your youth, your beauty, your very life force devoured by the generation that came before you. This is a story about the savage economics of existence, where beauty is capital, youth is a threat, and survival can depend on either consuming or being consumed. So when you encounter the story of Snow White now, in any of its forms, look past the shimmering animation and the romantic songs. Remember the 1812 text. Remember the mother's rage, her specific chilling demand, and the salt sizzling in the cooking pot. You are not looking at a simple fairy tale about a vain stepmother. You are looking at the heavily disguised and deeply unsettling ghost of a much older story. A story about a mother's cannibalistic hunger and the daughter who was lucky enough to be choked by the apple before she could be eaten.